Today we're going to be talking about improved hardening, on what tanks you should take it, how it plays in with the first field mod for heavy tanks, and also just generally speaking about what it does to your tank. As you can see here, we have improved hardening class 1. The class doesn't matter. It will be exactly the same for class 3, just the same as it is for class 1. It's just the tier of tank that you can put it on. The first thing you're going to see is the effect. It will fully restore suspension hit points after repairs, meaning that when you're just sitting there and it's repairing naturally, not using a repair kit, it will just go back to full health, rather than the roughly 75% of what it usually does if you just let them repair normally. Next thing you'll see is that you get 10% to vehicle hit points, and I am making sure that I'm using all of these as if it was in the correct slot, because that's what you should be using it in anyway. So it'll give you 10% more hit points, it'll give you 65% extra suspension durability, 20% more repair speed on the tracks, 10% extra load capacity, and minus 65 to hull damage caused by suspension damage during impact, which will include ramming and jumping off of things. Now, the main one is not to give you more hit points, it's actually to give you more track health. And the reason why is because this is just super important for heavy tanks. And not just heavy tanks, any tank that will brawl, because if you take an extra shot to track you, that is just a longer time that you're going to be surviving. The ability to not get tracked in certain situations far outweighs pretty much every other piece of equipment in the game sometimes. Which is why I keep telling people that HP boost is like a must-have on a heavy tank. No matter what map you're on, you should always have HP boost on heavies. And honestly, this piece of equipment, along with Turbo, really did ruin the game when they introduced it, because it removed the skill cap of being good at the game and actually going for those track shots and keeping someone perma-tracked and just using your knowledge about the game and your ability for a medium tank with 320 alpha, which are kind of obsolete now, to actually go around and just being a nuisance to heavy tanks. Because now heavy tanks take 4 shots to actually be properly tracked and be kept in place. And at that point, you've probably killed the tank, because you're no way going to be circle strafing a heavy that has 4 shots to track and not taking damage. Not to mention, if you have a team with you, that's not going to happen, is it? So this piece of equipment, honestly borderline OP for heavy tanks. Which now brings me on to my next point, which is solely for heavy tanks and how hardening works with the first field mod on the left-hand side. Because a lot of people, and I mean a lot, just go into the field mods right here and they go, oh look, all-terrain suspension, that will give me +7 maintaining speed across all terrain types. And then they look at the disadvantages and think, 10% suspension durability, that's nothing, like, I'll take that. It's a little bit of a hit to, getting tracked maybe, but yeah, it's fine. No. If you're using hardening, you should not be using this left-hand field mod unless you're in a certain situation. And that situation is when you have 300 track health as default. The way you check this is by going onto the very useful website of tanks.gg, looking at the tank stats, and then looking at the track health right here on the right-hand side. Now, the problem with this is that a lot of tanks actually benefit from the left-hand field mod that are not having 300 track health, such as the IS-7. The IS-7 only has 250 track health. And you may be thinking to yourself, does it really matter? Like, by the time that I use the left-hand field mod and then I use hardening, I get 371 track health. That's pretty good. And most tanks are only going to do 180 module damage. So there's no way that I can get tracked in the first shot, right? Wrong. From my testing, you need at least 400 track health to not get tracked in the first shot by a 120mm caliber gun. Anything below 400 track health will get tracked in the first shot as long as it's in the track wheel, i.e. being the sprockets at the front and the back of the tank. So for example, on the IS-7, if you went and shot right here, you would track and do damage. And if you don't have 400 track health, you are going to have your tracks destroyed. And that's from a Conqueror, 120mm gun. Obviously, if you shoot in around here, you're not going to track because there's nothing to really, do damage. Now, there is an article where it says if you go and shoot through the track wheel, then you will do ×2 damage. But even that is wrong. And that's on the wiki. It does say that it's not official from Wargaming, so Just keep that in mind. And Wargaming hasn't disclosed how much damage it does, but it is definitely not ×2. It is a lot higher than that. Because if you think about it, a Conqueror or Super Conqueror going and shooting this exact drive wheel, it will go and do 165 module damage. Times that by 2, that's 330. Meaning that this should never get penned and damage and the track blown off in the first shot. But it does. Unless you go to about 400, that is when you're roughly safe. You can still get the plus 25% RNG roll and then get tracked in the first shot, but it's unlikely. Now, to show you exactly how all of this is going to tie in together, I am going to be using the Chieftain in a training room, and I will shoot the Chieftain in the track wheel. And because it has 250 track health, you'll see that if I choose the left-hand field mod, it will go straight through, even with the normal HP boost. And I will be using a Super Conqueror to do it, which is 120mm caliber gun. So as you can see here, we have the Chief, and if we go and shoot this, even though 2,500 hit points, that's the default hardening, we're going straight through it. Every single time through the track wheel. That's using the left-hand field mod. So you are not safe if you do this. You should never, ever, ever be using the left-hand field mod with the Chief. Especially if you have a tank like the Chieftain, like the Super Conk. They both have 250 track health, but they actually have good terrain resistances as well. So there's no reason to pick the left-hand field mod in this scenario. But now, if we went and, say, removed that field mod, also, as you can see here, the effective top speed, the terrain resistances, as long as these two are the same on hard and medium as going at the top speed, you're absolutely fine. As you can see here, if we choose the left one, it makes no real difference. There is no reason to choose the left-hand field mod on the Chieftain, on the Super Conk, and the Super Conk is exactly the same as the Chief in this scenario. There's no reason to do it. But now that we have 412 hit points, we should be able to take one shot extra. It may be that we get a little bit of a high roll on RNG and we end up tracking it in the first shot, but most of the time it should be 2 shots to track. Now this is without the field mod, and it should go like this. However, obviously sometimes you're going to track in 1 shot. That is just RNG at the end of the day, but it should take 2 shots to track just like that. The exception is going to be when you use HE. But as you can see, with HE, it will track in 1 shot. Pretty much every single time. You're always guaranteed to track in 1 shot, as long as you're hitting the drive wheel. And now if we switch back to AP, we're back to needing 2 shots. Now, because of the RNG effect of the module damage, there is a debate whether or not you should choose the right-hand field mod. And if you have a good crew, this isn't going to be affected. So like on the Chief, on the S-Conk, I'd actually probably recommend you do it, just to have that extra track health just for security, especially if you're only using the standard improved hardening. Because, well, I mean, even if you're using like Bounty, which is right here, as you can see with the full crew, you know, you get 467, and then you go all the way up to Bonded, 481. For these types of tanks, like the S-Conk, like the Chief, where they have very, very good effective top speed, being on hard and medium already, you should probably just choose the right-hand field mod, which is going against basically what every single person in the community says. But the proof is there. Like, I really don't see any downside to choosing the right-hand field mod on a Chieftain, other than you're just not going to get tracked by even bigger caliber guns. And sure, your effective traverse speed goes down a little bit, but you are not going to notice it. The same as your soft top speed. If you're in swamp, you're already going to be slow. It's not really going to make much of a difference. And that extra little bit of track health could actually help you out. Now, you may be wondering though, what if, let's say that I use bond hardening and then I use the left-hand field mod. I get 393 track health. Is that enough to just be okay? Because on some tanks, that's what you're going to be wanting to have. So let's test that, shall we? So here we are once more, and it has bond HP, as you can see, by 2,550 hit points, and it is using the left-hand field mod. Does it work? Okay. Maybe not then. But it could just be a fluke. I mean, You may get a bounce, or you may get a double shot, but it looks like 390. There you go. See? It's, yeah. I wouldn't trust it. So it looks like around about 400 track health is the sweet spot to making sure that you're not going to get tracked in the first shot. Because even at 390 this is still mostly getting tracked in one shot. Which is then why I said about, you know, if you're going to be using the standard hardening, it might be worth just using the right-hand field mod on tanks like this, because then that's going to negate any of that slight RNG where you're going to get tracked in the first shot. Especially on tanks like this. Obviously, if you have a tank that has absolutely awful trains distances, you shouldn't use it at all. But on tanks like the Super Conch, like the Chieftain, like a lot of other tanks actually, they do have good, effective hard and medium. You should be using the right-hand field mod just to help you out a little bit more. However, what if you're in a tank like the Kranvang that has 300 track health? Could you use the left-hand field mod in that scenario? Well, yes you can, because if you use hardening, and then you use the left-hand field mod, you go up to 445 track health, which is more than enough to deal with anything like that. As long as you're using all your skills, you then have your top speed ready. You could put a turbo in there as well. And then you have the 50 km/h top speed. You're close to getting that medium terrain resistance, which is why I say, like, for if the Kran had, say, 250 track health, and you chose the right-hand field mod, look how slow it goes. Like, that's why it's not really worth it in that kind of scenario. But with the Kran, you can choose the left-hand field mod, and everything is absolutely fine. Obviously, I'm not going to show this because it's exactly the same as what I've just showed, but it just has a little bit more health. So you will not get tracked in the first shot if you use hardening and the left-hand field mod on the Kran. The exact same thing goes for the AMX M454, which has 300 track health by default. You could then use hardening and it goes up to 445. There isn't any way of telling in-game, which is the most annoying thing about this, if the track health is enough. I wish they showed the track health in-game, because it would save so much time and effort rather than going on to tanks.gg and then going and looking up the tank and then seeing, oh, look, it has 250 track health. Okay, I can't use a left-hand field mod. But if you have a look at the AMX, it already gets very, very good hard and medium train distances. So you might as well just choose the right-hand field mod and get infinite track health. But realistically, you should probably just, you know, go without any on that tank. Because that's not really worth it. Like, if you already have 300 track health, it's not really worth the extra, like, slowness that you would get with the train distances. So if you have 300 track health, either choose the left-hand side if you have bad terrain distances, or just choose nothing at all. But when it comes down to tanks like the IS-4, which has 250 track health, you're going to be umming and ahhing about what you should actually take. Because if you take the right-hand field mod, you're going to just... that is awful. like this is with the off-road driving perk and stuff like that. So that is not really worth to take at all. Like, if you take the left-hand field mod, you don't really even gain that much. Like, it's not really worth it to take the left-hand field mod and then lose that track health benefit just for a little bit faster top speed. Like, it's not... that's not worth it, in my opinion. Now, I've only spoken about tier 10 up to this point. You may be wondering about tier 8. Now, the problem with tier 8 is that it does get 220 track health, which is not enough. Because even if you didn't choose the left-hand field mod and you just went with the standard hardening, you only get to 363, which is going to get you tracked in one shot by 120 caliber guns. And even at tier 8, there's still quite a few of them, especially if you get up to tier 10 in matchmaking. And if you were so inclined to choose the left-hand field mod, you're basically going to get tracked by everything near enough in the first shot. So I think even like 105 caliber guns would be able to one-shot you at that point. So it's not advised to choose that. However, if you use Bounty HP and you use the right-hand field mod, you go to 411 track health. If you're using a Skoda 256, select the right-hand field mod and then Bounty HP, and you'll be absolutely fine. I mean, it sucks that we have to do this at tier 8, but there you go. The same thing applies. The only difference at the lower tiers is that you kind of want to have that right-hand field mod rather than nothing at all. And if you cannot do it because of the terrain distances, then I suggest you just don't choose any. Or you don't use hardening. It's down to you. Like, hardening at the lower tiers is not necessarily worth it. And yes, I am well aware of the fact that you will meet a lot of the lower calibers, obviously, if you got into tier 6 matchmaking or something like that. But it still doesn't change the fact that you're still not having all of that track health for when you do meet a tank that is the same tier as you. Because 165 module damage is more than enough to go through, you know, up to 390, as we saw. So it's a bit of a struggle, this one, to get right. So to conclude with the hardening guide and the field mods and how it all ties into each other, if you have 300 track health, you may choose the left-hand field mod and hardening. If you have only 250 track health, then do not select anything for the first field mod, or you go for the right-hand field mod if you have good terrain resistances. For lower tier, tier 8 and below, you can either choose nothing at all, or you choose the right-hand field mod. If you choose the left-hand field mod, I would suggest that you don't run hardening, because it's just not worth it. You might as well choose something else that is going to benefit you better, because honestly, hardening just for the little bit of HP boost is not necessarily worth it. So hopefully this information was useful to you. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It does all help me out greatly, and I'll see you all in the next video.